Welcome to this new lecture in our course on the novel, on the modern novel. Today I will talk to you about the development of realism, and especially during the Victorian period, which we said in a previous lecture coincides with the reign of Queen Victoria from 1837 to 1901. So the development of realism in the Victorian society basically has to do with the development of a bourgeois society. This bourgeois society is basically a society in which there is a middle class. The biggest social class in society is a middle class. They're neither wealthy, rich people, nor are they extremely poor people. They're just in the middle. These are people who made their money from the Industrial Revolution, from the colonization efforts of England and France and so on, and now they are comfortable. They're not wealthy, rich, but they are comfortable people. So the foundation of early bourgeois realism were laid by people. I mean, of course, this realism was laid down, the seeds of this realism was laid down by writers like Daniel Defoe and Jonathan Swift. But their novels, the novels of Defoe and Jonathan Swift, although they were new and with a new hero, with a new type of a hero, they were based on imaginary voyages, on fictitious voyages and adventures that were supposed to take place far away from England. Gradually, with time, by the 18th and 19th century, the readers' tastes changed. They wanted to find more and more of their own life reflected in literature. They don't want to know about the adventure of some hero in some faraway land. They want to know about, they want to read stories in which they can see their own lives reflected. Their everyday life, the everyday life of a bourgeois family, with its joys and sorrows, with its problems, with its complications and so on. These demands were satisfied when the great novels of Samuel Richardson, Henry Fielding, Tobias Smollett, among others, appeared. Now we have novels that tell stories about average people in England. For people, for the readers, it was something familiar. They read about heroes who look like them, who live like them, who work like them, who have concerns and worries like them. The greatest merit of these novelists, their greatest merit, lies in their deep sympathy for the common man. They have a very deep sympathy for the average person, right? Before that, if you compare it, for example, with Shakespeare's plays, Shakespeare's tragedies are all about kings or princes, right? Epic poetry is all about kings and princes and lords and dukes and duchesses and so on. Well, with the novel, the literature is now showing deep sympathy for the common man, for the average person, the man in the street, who had become the central figure of the new bourgeois world. So the average man, the man in the street, all of a sudden, now in the 19th century, in the 18th and 19th century, has become the central figure. It's no more a Hamlet, Prince of Denmark, or a King Lear, or a Macbeth, big general in some kingdom, but it's the average person in the street. Has become now the center of attention, the center of the bourgeois world, the center of European society. The common man is shown in these novels in his actual surroundings, in his real life, in his everyday life, in his dirty, poor, gritty existence is shown in these novels, which makes him so convincing, so believable, and so true to life. So you can imagine when people read these stories, they identify, they see themselves in those characters. Realism, realist writers basically sought to narrate their novels also from an objective perspective. The writers, for example, like Charles Dickens, for example, or George Eliot or Henry James, they try to tell the stories in these novel stories from an objective, unbiased perspective that simply and clearly represented the factual elements of the story. They don't want to take sides in it, but they just, as if like some artist describes it, the novel is like holding a mirror to life. So whatever is there, whatever is depicted by the novel, by the mirror, is what ends up in the novel. So these writers became masters at psychological characterization. They became very good at giving very deep and detailed psychological portraits of these characters, detailed descriptions of everyday life in realistic settings, and dialogues that captures the idioms and the speech of everyday life people, and the natural intonations and the natural vocabulary of human speech in its everyday life surroundings. Realist novels endeavored to accurately represent contemporary culture and people from all walks of life. So in this fashion, this is how realist novelists address themes of socio-economic conflicts by contrasting the living conditions of the poor with those of the upper classes in urban as well as rural societies. Realist writers are widely celebrated for their mastery of objective third-person narrations, right? They're very good at it. They use the third-person narrative. And they're considered to be, these realist writers, they're considered to be reliable socio-cultural documents of the 19th century, right? So we can read novels and we can extract socio-cultural information about Victorian society from these novels. They are not historical documents because they are fictitious, but from the detailed description of life in these novels, we can learn a great deal about everyday life in Victorian society. Critics consistently praise the realists for their success in accurately representing all aspects of society, culture, and politics contemporary to their own. Realism in this fashion exerted widespread impact on many aspects of 20th century thought, including religion, philosophy, psychology, politics, arts, and so on. Realism became a dominant philosophy by the late 19th century and the early 20th century. What are the characteristics of the realist novel? Well, first of all, it has a linear flow of the narrative. The narrative is linear, right? It starts from A and ends with Z, right? It doesn't start with M and goes back to F and goes back to D. It's linear. Usually the realist novels also have a unity and a coherence of the plot and character and the cause-effect development, the way the plot is driven by a cause-effect. Usually they are very tight, they are very well crafted pieces of narrative. Their characteristics also include the moral and philosophical meaning of literary action. There's always an attempt to explore moral and philosophical dimensions of the action. They always advocate bourgeois rationality. We have to remember that the 19th century realism in Victorian society coincides with the triumph of industrialism. This is the time of when Europe started building huge industrial complexes, huge factories, big boats and big ships, and right? And this is also a time when Europe, the European man, developed a huge faith in science, and in reason, in the power of reason to understand everything, right? And also, this is the time in the Victorian period where there was a reaction, a rejection of Romanticism, which dominated the late 18th and early 19th century. Romanticism was dominated by sentimentality, a rejection of reason. Well, the 19th century is the opposite. It rejected the sentimentality, the sentimentalism of Romanticism, and adopted a firm belief and faith in reason and science, and in bourgeois rationality, the rationality of the middle classes, the moral rectitude, the sense of moral rectitude of the middle classes. The discourse of the novel in this sense is a rational, public, objective discourse. Rational, public, and objective discourse. The realist novel in the 19th century was also written in opposition to romance, to the romance literature. We mentioned this in the previous lecture. They rejected romance in literature. They wanted to explore the everyday, the commonplace, the ordinary, the poor person, right? And in the representation of real life experiences and characters, as opposed to the romance which explores instances of ideal love, the biggest and most intense love ever. Well, the novel isn't interested in that. The novel is interested in real life experiences and characters, right? They're not interested in the moral code of the nobility. They're interested in the moral code of average bourgeois society based on rationalism, right? So these are the characteristics of the realist novel. In our coming lectures, we shall look at one of the most important novels in the modern era, and we will talk about the content, the themes, the style, etc. Please be ready for it. We shall be talking about Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness. And until then, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa ta'ala wa barakatuh.